Welcome to episode 2 of my Hardcore Terra Firma Craft Let's Play series. So let's drop our workbench and begin making our first chisel. First we're going to need to take 5 balls of clay and put them in a U shape in our workbench. And that is going to give us 4 unfired ceramic molds. We are then going to be taking our ceramic molds, placing them in the fire pit so we can begin our firing process. This usually takes no more than a minute to fire, and as you can see we can hover over the actual clay mold and watch the process go up from hot to very hot. You might as well go ahead and make several molds while you're at it, because when you actually pour your molten metal into your ceramic mold, you actually use up that ceramic mold while making the ingot. So might as well make several while we're here. And that should save you some time while making your metal tools. Another good tip is to actually keep 2 fired ceramic molds in your fire pit to catch any overflow molten metal that might leak from your first one. Bismuthinite is going to be our first tier 1 ore that we're actually going to work with first. And the reason for this is it has a very low liquid state and is fairly common through most regions. Unlike its counterpart tin, which can only be found in regions with igneous stone. With that being said, we're also going to want to stockpile our tin because it's one of the ingredients into making bronze, which is 3 parts copper and 1 part tin. So it is always wise to know what resources you can use now, but what resources that you should hold on to use at a later date. Another one of these metals we should be holding on to is zinc, because zinc is needed to make brass, and brass is one of the main components into making red steel, which is actually one of our final metals in this game. So see, you never want to be wasteful with any ore you find on the ground, because that ore is going to be made into a metal, and that metal is going to be made into an alloy, and so on and so on and so forth. So it looks like we're getting down to our last piece of ore that we need to smelt down into molten metal. Now bismuth needs to go into the first star of very hot for it to actually turn into liquid. And it seems like every time you smelt your last ore down, you always have a little overflow. So that's why we have our second ceramic mold there. So now that we're done here, we'll go ahead and throw our last piece of ore and let it smelt down to our overflow. Take out our remaining peat and go ahead and click on our stone anvil. And that's going to be able to bring up our anvil interface where we're going to be able to take unshaped metal and turn it into our ingots. You can see here our metal is still in a liquid state, so we're actually going to have to pull it back to our inventory to allow it to cool down, because when metal is actually on the anvil itself, it will not cool. Now I don't know if it's intended to be like that, or if just the cooling process is slowed down while on the anvil. But it does make it a lot easier when you don't have to worry about your metal cooling, and you can actually decide on which hit you're actually going to take next. So with that being said, let's actually get into our next stage of smithing. Now the interface actually has 8 different maneuvers you can use to move the little arrow at the bottom left or right. The maneuvers to the left in red will actually move your arrows to the left, and the maneuvers in the right, which are in green, will actually move your arrows to the right. As you can see, there's also rules you have to follow, and those are going to be determined on the complexity of the item that you're actually making on the anvil. So being that I was only making a simple ingot, I only had to make sure my last 3 maneuvers were hits. And they will become more complex with higher tier metals. We are now ready to enter the planning phase of smithing. So first we're going to need to squeeze some of our ink out of our ink sacs and take some paper and place it in our scribing table. Now with our ink, we'll be drawing out a pattern on our paper for our chisel head. Now with our chisel head pattern complete, we'll be reheating our ingot back to a workable state. And for bismuth, we will need to bring the temperature of the ingot to the last 2 stages of hot, or the first stage of very hot, to make a workable ingot. that we have our ingot back to very hot, we're going to take it back to our anvil and turn it into our chisel head. Now that the ingot and our plans are now on our anvil, you can see that our rules have increased in complexity. But with a few light hits and a little luck, you can see that we've completed our chisel head and is ready to be made into our first metal tool. And there we go, one chisel head and one stick into our metal chisel, which we'll be using to make bricks in our next episodes.